maximize that screen. It's gonna be cold tonight. Oh, like lunch. Hopefully nobody here.
I might have to shut it after we get going.
Okay.
So now we
And
need
it shows
to
recording, so.
get, how do you get?
Oh, okay,
to-
Google. Okay, so then hit that share screen. And then you can hit the share if it's already highlighted. And then hit the minimize. And then go to outside of Google. And I meant to save the icon thing. I put something wrong in it. Share. Yeah. Mhm. We'll see. Scroll that like scroll like through just to make sure. Okay. So it looks like it got it. One time. And maybe since that's stopping, maybe it's already been done on this laptop now. Maybe that's right. Yep.
Okay, so then if you would want me to put the agenda.
Uh-huh. I think it goes there. And
Okay.
then, yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So you
Yeah.
can
So if you
go
want
back and forth.
yeah. Mm-hmm. You know, just keep sharing them and if you want and if you want to stop sharing, then you could stop sharing.
Okay.
Oh shoot, I forgot my copy. I went back there to get it and.
What? Yeah, there's one laying over there. Jeff's not. Hey, how you doing, Kyle? Hi. When they start signing in from home,
Mm-hmm.
where,
And then, so since you're, go up here and see if they'll give you, oh, there it is. Okay, so the participants here, then if you want to mute someone, if you want to, yeah, so like the attendees are 0, but if they join in from home, now the panel should be already listed, but over here, but on the attendees, if there's any extra, then that's where we give the option. Yeah, wherever you want.
see.
Yeah, you should. I don't think it's stated. I don't have to watch that to see, if they join. Of course, they'll be participants, they'll be panelists. If she'll be panelists, but like attendees, if you click over here, that will be in.
Okay, so these two are.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Now, what about the?
Okay, like the. Oh. I heard about that. So glad you said that.
What's that?
Oh. So I know it might be answered on this presentation, but have we really done anything like this or replaced or?
As far as enacting the,
So this isn't just replacement of other stuff. This is,
well, it's part of it's the maintenance of existing
okay,
or installation of infrastructure that needs fixed problem. I mean, because most of the stormwater stuff's ancient and it was probably installed piecemeal over time anyway. So I think the idea is to identify critical areas that you get the most bang for your buck initially. So. But eventually, I mean, like subdivisions, eventually there'll be maintenance on that infrastructure, but it'll be a while. So I think they figured 5% a year. Thanks.
Oh gosh, Kyle, you have to suffer through this again. That's all we're doing, going over it.
That's good review.
So now you're gonna catch me if I say something different, right?
I thought this stuff looked familiar. Yeah, too many, the boards run together sometimes.
Are you on 3?
What's the 4? Plan commission, DZA, utility rate.
Hi, Jenny.
Hi.
Rachel and I agree that your new haircut makes you look like you're like 22.
There's 22.
That's the goal of every hairstyle, right?
This is the oldest I've felt this year after that injury.
This is the oldest you've felt?
Well, I tore my ACL completely doing Taekwondo in February, and everything was delayed because of COVID. So my muscles all were basically overcompensating, which isn't good when you're then rehabbing later.
What are you doing Taekwondo at?
I do it with Myron in town. My
Oh, yeah,
boys
yeah.
both compete,
Yeah,
and I did too.
yeah. I did
Okay.
it at Master Youth, and I got all the way to where I was ready to test for my black belt. And,
Okay, so Craig Switzer, I
had a-
would.
My knee got swollen.
I would.
I think I told you that. Went to the doctor and he was like,
Already.
"You were just in a car
Over
wreck."
on
I'm like,
that
"No."
floor, and you could even, you
He
could.
said, "What's the last trauma you had?" And I said, "Well, I had a parachute accident in the Marine Corps 25 years ago."
And
Because
then
when you,
put,
half your
promote to
tendons,
panelists.
your D was dislocated and half the tendons aren't attached anymore. And it just finally gave out. And
I would,
so,
I think some of mine has some other arthritis stuff going on, and
yeah,
it made that
whether
leg
that
weak.
is at the
And
shelter.
yep.
my brain tells me I
Maybe
can
on
do
her-
what I can do. I can't.
Yeah.
I'm not young.
Yeah, so he said you gotta quit
They didn't have
Taekwondo.
a panelist on her personal.
Quit running.
So she would have
Quit
been a panelist on that.
Well,
He didn't tell me I put on 40 pounds, but I did.
Okay, so
I
she's
put on
been-
some pounds this year, and it's a good thing I don't have to keep putting on suits for work because we're not
She
going to
would
the
probably-
office
she
for
would-
court hearings, and I don't want to buy a bunch of new suits yet.
Dress shirts and pajamas.
Say in case she wants to, yeah, it's not like someone we don't
I have
know.
court hearings
Right.
tomorrow.
It's all virtual.
Yeah, it's a couple that,
Who knows? I don't
we
like
did have
one
one
being on here.
contested back in
sorry.
the summer when
I
numbers
don't like
had
my picture.
dropped, but after, we have another
Yeah.
contestant, it keeps getting pushed off because
Yeah.
there was some fraud in the previous case. So
Because I think the reason why
it's
they're
not gonna
on
be
there
able
is
to
because sharing the screen. If you weren't sharing the screen,
Oh,
then go into the other view.
everything just is
View,
falling
whatever
right
it
around
was,
the holidays
and then it
too.
will just show.
okay.
Yeah, it's
And
crazy.
then
Thanks.
show them.
It's
Well, and I was
supposed to
thinking,
be, it's been canceled.
I was thinking my younger son's birthday was the week after because I went into labor on Thanksgiving. And I looked the other
Hi,
day at
Craig.
the calendar and I'm like.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
He doesn't.
My brother was born on Thanksgiving.
I started to eat and I'm like, I think we should go to the hospital. And my husband's like, are you serious? I just put food on my plate.
Pull a new cable down.
Oh, question mark, or something.
I don't know.
I hope they just keep on going, maybe go down 600 and
Yeah. They're not.
my double frontier connection is still.
I mean, that's, you can over-regulate, but without regulation, right? So it's,
I've got horror stories of them just running. Back in the 90s, they were running cable everywhere, so haphazard. culverts.
They just run right through, just a field culvert, not, like sometimes they'll run lines under a bridge.
Like they had no training?
No,
Well, even the, what is the MetroNet maybe, has been shut down in Fisher multiple
This
times.
will
They're
go
just
away.
basically going wild out there, putting stuff in and boring it in. Utilities.
You ready? Okay, so did this need that, was there something here?
No, we don't have it yet.
Okay.
I think we speak loud enough from this.
Okay. Okay.
I ain't started yet, so.
Might want to tell Craig to mute.
Craig, you want to mute yourself?
Sure.
Like you need to talk?
Are we ready? All right. We'll call the meeting in order here. We'll do roll call. Lenny Sisson,
Fire Lifeline.
Michelle Skeen.
I think that's it for our board. Board.
Just now, rental.
So we have a quorum.
Three, I thought.
Yeah, 3 of 5, so we have a quorum. We'll first do approval of minutes, and they were sent to us, and they should be in the packet as well. So I don't know if you can hear me, Michelle.
I can hear you.
Does anyone need any more time to look those over?
No,
Since they were
sure.
sent earlier. So I will do a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you,
Aye.
Michelle. So we have no old business to discuss. We wanted to meet today, to have Scott go over a report that Banning Engineer has done in regards to the storm water utility rate adjustment, and it's a 20-year plan. So I will turn this over to Scott.
Okay, well, thank you, Madam Chair. So, the storm rate, a stormwater utility was passed 6 years ago, and there was an old rate established, but the fee was never collected. And since then, the storm water situation and flooding in Pendleton has gotten a lot worse, and it's time to move forward and collect a fee. So, at the recommendation of town council, we went ahead and went back and did a annex or supplemental study from one that was done by DRW prior to the passing of the creating the utility 6 years ago. Also, council recommended not only do we redo the engineering study, but that we also go back and take the study, pass that to Baker Tilly, and that they will do a financial analysis and come up with a rate, we should say a maximum rate. Now, I believe the town council, and I will recommend to the town council that be pulled back, and I'll explain that in a little bit and why it's a good strategy. So the plan that you have before you is redacted. Town Council President Chet Babb didn't want the focus yet to be on the rate. It wanted to be on what's the problem and what do we need what's the plan to fix it, and what would be the worst case scenario as far as cost to do all the things that we have identified so far in the town. And every day I find out there's probably more issues than we thought the day before. But so we'll go through today, and we're going to look at raw numbers and projects and their estimated costs. So if we go ahead and open the study, the first is sort of a hotspot map. That's on page 4. And Banning came in and solicited input from the public, either through the internet or a community hearing that we had, where people brought in their issues with flooding. And this is through the years, as Kyle knows, this is one of the best ways to identify where your flooding issues are. And then as you go through this first section, I won't spend much time here, but you can see some pictures that residents brought in of flooding, and they're associated with the projects. If we skip to page 5, which is really chapter 1, or chapter, I would say page 8, which is chapter 1, it talks about what was in place and a little bit about the history in 2014. If you turn to starting on page 9, we start to put together some cost with updated, what they're calling updated funding needs under 2.0, page 9. And then as we go to page 10, there's also some money that's already being expended that's being borrowed from the electric fund, and the authorization to borrow that from another utility was passed recently by the town council. And then if you go to 2.2, the capital project summary, we have broken that into and projects and numbered them, and then projected the expenditures out a little bit. So I talked real fast, went through this, and now I'll pause there and see what your questions are. I will tell you this, we'll quickly, after we get through this section, we'll go through projects one by one so that we can get into detail about the projects. But at this point, do we have any?
This stands for 20 years, everything we've
Yeah.
identified
Yeah.
on that map.
Yeah, if we didn't identify any more problems or any more problems were created, this is a snapshot. And move forward.
20 years seems like a long span to not incur any hiccups or need for modifications. Do you anticipate that, or are your hands tied, or will you be able to modify this if necessary?
We will, according to bond counsel, we will be able to. And the strategy is, and this is that question is a good point for me to explain. What is going to happen, the strategy here is that we listed each project where we had a problem area and prioritized them. What we think is going to happen in a lot of these cases, as we start to do the engineering work, that we first are going to jet out that line, then we're going to camera it, and then decide from that how much work we will need to do. What we may find is we only have to reconstruct or fix things in certain areas, and then we'll move on to project 2. So, for instance, project 1 is the repair of Water Street. That's already under design from money that was borrowed from the utility. We think that estimate will probably be at $508,000. However, we may find that we're gonna be able to get community crossing money for that. So construction will be 75% from the grant, 25% from us, and we'll pay, but we have to pay for the engineering. Project 2, Project 2 is Water Street and Hollowell Drive. We may find on that is there's a lot less work than we thought, and plus as we fix Water Street, that Hollowell Drive may actually start flowing a lot better. That's why we prioritize this project 2, just because it goes in conjunction with 1. And then project 3, I think, is the classic example I was trying to explain. That's about 1,000-foot line. And it is, we found it at the big, it's about 4 months ago when I first started, that line was totally silted up, no flow, and it was collapsed down at the manhole at Main and Madison. We got that jetted out, and now we think that we don't need to reconstruct the whole 1,000 feet. We probably only need to reconstruct where it crosses underneath Elm Street, between Pendleton Avenue and Main Street. And then we'll go back and permanently fix where the line ends at Madison Avenue. And so instead of that being a $1.2 million project, we may be able to easily come in under 200,000, but we're not going to know until we really get it.
Is that a reconstruct or a total replacement?
That one, I think we just need to reconstruct underneath Elm Street and then fix the line at the end of Madison Avenue. And then there's probably 2 spots between there where we need to repair the line. We've got the line flowing, and it's starting to clean itself out a little bit. But underneath Elm Street, we've got total collapses. Putting it out and cleaning it and maintaining it is not gonna help. And that's a critical juncture. That right there is causing all the backup that you see in the downtown area, especially along High Street and behind the lumber company, behind the liquor store, and the flooding that you see on Pendleton Avenue at Elm Street. Okay? Does that make sense?
38 Adams.
Yeah, do you want me to keep going down? Do you want me to go to the projects now with that, since I've started on that? Well, let me, before I do that, let's go to page 11. So page 11 is the annual expenses. Part of the strategy we have too is to be real aggressive on maintenance. We are finding that almost every line in Pendleton has never been jetted out. It's never been cleaned out. And it has been a hugely successful project. We've brought in, it's a $500,000 machine. The technology, jetting technologies existed for a few decades, but not to the extent that we have now. They can run 1,000 feet, one direction, cut through tree roots. They just screw on a special head, and that hydraulic, the high pressure of the water will cut right through a tree limb. But they can't go through a collapse, as you can imagine. So we're going to do some heavy jetting. We'll move 1.5 employees to the stormwater utility. We'll have half a full-time equivalent in the clerk's office. There will be some billing expenses. Non-engineering the non-project costs, general counsel. We're gonna pick up a pickup truck, and that cost is annualized. We've already bought a sweeper. We'll pay back that sweeper and then close it out in 2024. Get a gator. I hope to get a jetting machine eventually of our own. Not a $500,000 one, but maybe around 200,000 of that would be my estimate on the size. It would be nice for doing most of the maintenance. Right now, the machine that we bring into town, we're doing once or twice a month. It costs us $1,000 a day. And I just found out we've got a problem out at the water treatment plant. We're gonna have to jet out a tank because it's collecting a lot of iron. So we could also use that for the water utility. Small projects, to me, this is really where you are getting ahead of it. That's where we identify not a major project, but a small project. And a classic, we did a pilot one in a neighborhood. It was on McCoy Drive. There's a line that ran between McCoy from East Street and Pendleton Avenue, and it went in. There was flooding back there, and it affected almost every home from the railroad track all the way up to East Street. And we picked that as a pilot project because we had power lines that run through that, and the power lines were they were just rotting out from being in water all the time. And all we had to do was run probably 70 feet of a small 4-inch line. And the only reason it's 4-inch, Kyle, normally I don't ever want to go lower than a 12-inch, but we could only dig down about 18 inches when we hit bedrock. So that we went with a small line and then put in 3 yard drains, and now everything's dry. Of course, we'll see how it goes when we hit a true wet season. But those little projects are when people will begin to feel not only the problem that exists in the street, but also in their yard. So when we have a chance that where it benefits the town and the neighborhood, we want to do those small projects, and we use our own resources. So we want to have
So Scott, I don't see any cost baked into this for personnel. Is that assuming that you'll just pull someone from utilities to do this work?
No, if you go to the top at 2.3, the first line item is 1.5 full-time equivalent stormwater.
Oh, I see. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't read it that way.
So really, and then you add half a full-time equivalent out of the clerk's office.
Mm-hmm, I see.
Bills and that sort of thing. And then
Is the billing a service or is that a body?
the billing will be, right now the plan is not to bill through utility, but add it to the property tax.
Okay.
And there's several reasons why we want to do that.
No, I think that's a good idea.
Then also we have 55,000 feet of open legal drains in the town and tiled 67,000 feet. So the problem we have is if we spend all this money and we're putting it into some of the legal drains that are running through the town and they're not being maintained by the county, which they're not, they just don't collect enough money, then we're spending a lot of money and then still not getting the water out of town. So we need part of the strategy, the long-term strategy is to have an agreement with the county that we go in and help them with maintenance. And in some cases, we may actually want to take that drain over or have an agreement with them that we are totally responsible for the maintenance, especially if the drain stops, the legal drain starts and stops within the town. And I think there might be a map in here. It might be hard to read. I can't remember, but was it in the back? Yeah, it's really hard to read. It's on page 52. It's the blue. It's really hard to read on an 8.5 by 11. Could you go to page 52 and try and zoom in? While she's working on that, then here is a list of the drains that are in town. They're on page 12. Those are legal drains. So I don't know, at this point, I don't know how negotiations will go with the county. I would think they'd be pretty tickled that we, yeah, keep zooming in. Keep zooming in. Yeah, let's pick, I'm just trying to.
And north is to the line.
Oh, that's why I'm just wanting to, yeah.
Can you go this way a little bit? So we can see the right side of the screen. Go the other way.
Right.
Okay, and then zoom down. You know what? I think this is just gonna be too hard to see.
So anyway, we had to put together a rough estimate on what it would take to maintain those county drains. We'll continue to go through the projects, and then we'll come back and talk about the ERUs, equivalent residential units, which I think will be important here. So project 3 was Felton Avenue and Elm Street. And project 4 is now on yours it says State Road 38. That's a typo. That should say State Street. So State Street and Adams Street. Right in there, we're having, and we just jetted it out 2 days ago, and we found collapsed lines that go from State South Adams Street down right into the creek. There is actually, believe it or not, 3 within the span of 2 lots. There is 3 discharges into the creek and then 1 open channel discharge into Fall Creek. And then the line that connects that project will also, we relabeled it, and we're calling project 4 is going to be State Street, Adams Street, and Franklin Street. The line that runs down to Adams Street, down State Street to Adams Street from Franklin is clogged up, and we put some dye in it, and it came out in a weird area on the creek. It did not come out at one of the 4 discharges. So, gosh knows what we're discovering. We also discovered a line. We're like opening 2 days ago. It was like opening King Tut's tomb because it's probably 80 years old and it looks like it was built yesterday. The brick is just pristine. The tile is pristine, and it's on Tile Street. And God, it's running at a 45-degree angle, and we have no idea where it's going, but it's in perfect condition. And it was in somebody's yard. Okay, project 5. We have a lot of flooding in the alleys behind that run parallel to East Street. So that needs to be looked at. Project 6 is High Street. And then project 7 will be the flooding in front of the fire station, and also it floods behind the fire station. There's an existing line that runs on Broadway to Water Street, and we'll stub off when we do the Water Street project. To maybe reconstruct that line that drains the front of the fire station. We may also reroute that. We're not sure until we get in the engineering study what we'll do. Project 8 is the will handle around Pearl Street, the flooding there. And we stopped at 8. We did have a project 9, but we took that out. Now the county projects, we are numbering those by letter. Project A is the best way to describe it. If you go out 132 from Main Street, come up Main Street, the old 130 turn left as you're going out, let's say to the west, you see there's a little drain that goes underneath the 132, and then it parallels along 130 and then heads along the tree line between the church and that cornfield, and it heads right for Fall Creek. Well, that's what drains Carrick Glen. And what we found is that there is a lot more, because there's a lot more volume coming off of Carrick Glen, that even that after what normally would be the water, the runoff water, which is silty normally, you don't notice it because it's discharging into the creek, Fall Creek, which is running, and it's running a little silty too. But now it's going to drain longer, and already we're finding that ditch continues to pull silt into Fall Creek, and it's very noticeable, and we've got a lot of complaints. So anticipating that we're going to have to probably do a lot of work there, we have started to do some work, and we're going to put in riprap along 132 here pretty quickly, probably in the next couple of weeks. McCarty Drain, which drains the Filburn property and the farm ground around that. That thing's been really beaten up over the years. And then on the east side of Broadway, it floods terribly. And so there probably needs to be some inlets put on that side. And then there needs to probably be a reconstruction where it discharges into a pond at Pendleton Avenue and Macquarie Road. Got that pond with a couple of cabins there, right where the old co-op is. So that probably needs to be reconstructed. And then Banning Engineering thinks we need to look at Rosa Fry Drain, because that will be so critical as subdivisions go in there at 132 that we'll probably have to widen that drain and increase its capacity. So those are the legal drains owned by the county that we think we need to invest in. And I suspect as we go on, we'll probably find
Right, wasn't that cut off at one point?
No, it goes on up. It doesn't go through there.
Okay. I thought it
It's all-
was cut off at some point.
At the interstate.
Yeah.
It wasn't the interstate.
It
It used to go right up through Nestle. but
Yeah.
it's cut off.
Yeah.
And I know, yeah, it floods a lot less than Minkle's property there now after they did that 132 culvert.
You know, another project we almost added was up near where you live, but we decided we could probably do that as a minor project. I forget what the issue is up
That
there.
dead end road.
No, just before you go over the interstate, right? Is that where you live?
I live right at the corner of the T
What?
at 400 and 600 T. Right across the street from Carrick Glen.
Okay, yeah.
And we used to hold a lot of water, and so did Mingle, but since that project. Of course, we haven't had a lot of rain to
Right.
test it, but it seems to be better.
Yeah. So part of what their study is to also calculate how many equivalent residential units there is. So if we go back to, trying to figure out what that. Start at 5. The old rate, by the way, was $4. It was just never collected. So let's go to 5. So we had them recalculate how many ERUs there are, equivalent residential units. And so they looked at the number of residential parcels, the impervious area, and then calculated what the average was.
5.0.
Yeah, I'm on 5.0,
Page
page
21.
21, I'm sorry. All right, and then they looked at agricultural properties. And what we're proposing, and this is where, good point, we're going to throw this out and see what your reaction is. So on a agricultural property that doesn't have a home on it, let's say there's no structures on it, we'll just say it's 1 ERU. A lot of agricultural properties are drained by legal drains, and they do have a county legal drain assessment. So with those, we'll go ahead and still collect, even though it may be 200 acres, we'll just collect 1 equivalent ERU. There are commercial properties, quite a few, oh yeah, the high-end users. The high-end users, that's a redacted page on 23. They're like Tractor Supply, the school corporation. Those are some of the higher end users. The town has a lot of equivalent ERUs.
That's based on impervious.
Right. Yep. Impervious area. Also, if it's a parcel that's less than 2,500 square feet, we'll just say it's 0. We won't collect on that. Tax exempt properties. What we're proposing on that is that is no less than 1 ERU, but if it's quite a large property, it would only be 20%. So if it's a taxable entity, tax exempt property such as the church and the schools, that we only charge 1 ERU or 20%, whichever is the less. Now, if they get to be, a mega church moves into town, and it's huge, and then we may have to readdress this issue, because they're contributing a whole bunch to the runoff, and they need to contribute something. There are a few properties without property tax code, but it's very few. So really, the question is, the agricultural properties that do not have build out treated as 1 ERU, and the tax.
So a 200-acre parcel and a 2-acre parcel would be just 1 unit each.
Yeah, 1 ERU. So under the existing, it would be $4 per month. Now, some large properties, we need to have special case. And I think when we do the ordinance, I think I would like it as staff can evaluate certain parcel or certain property. Classic example is Pine Lakes, huge. I can't remember how many ERUs it is, but that's because it's got all those cabins. But the reality is those cabins drain right into the pond. They go 10 feet and they're right back into that pond. So would it be fair to charge them, 80 ERUs, I forget what it is off the top of my head, but when they're not causing anybody any trouble, you know. So they probably need to have a reduction.
Well, how we go about that, we need to make sure we document it so then we can.
We could
Use the
bring it to the
same-
BZA or
Yeah.
somebody one of the bodies
Use
to,
the same formula
right,
for future.
Yeah.
Occupancy.
yeah.
So will this fee and the legal drain fee be collected then
Yeah, you would, yeah,
by both?
right, because we don't have control over the county.
From property taxes? That's what you were.
Yeah,
saying.
state law allows you to add fees to the property tax. So we collect on it twice a year.
Now, in regards to, I like, especially these long build-out projects, where you're collecting a lot of fees. And I don't know, Michelle, if you can hear me, I'm kind of a fan when it comes to capital projects to have certain restricted accounts, because that helps to keep things clean on the books.
Yeah,
And especially if we're looking at projects, spanning out, we just don't want that money to end up, somewhere else that's dedicated for this.
yeah.
I don't know if you want to chime in, Michelle, but I definitely, I tend to advocate for that.
Well, that was one of my concerns with this project stretching over 20 years. With changing of the guard on different boards and commissions and councils, and maybe, even town manager, it just depends, how long people are going to stay in place. But I don't want to see that get great. I want to see it stay true to its form for this specific purpose. I mean, accounting wise, it's easy to do it on the books, but it's also easy for it to get construed.
Yeah,
Absolutely. But I think if you have that restricted account.
yeah,
it-
state
it
law
does
makes it,
help.
yeah, state law makes it restricted. I think I probably didn't talk about it enough, but what we'll do is, the reason we got bond counsel online is because whatever that rate is, they'll back calculate and figure out how much, let's say a 20-year bond, how much we will have. I forget what the rate was. Okay, this is not, it's the magnitudes are roughly right, but I think at a $10 rate, you have $3 million on a 20-year bond. So if you notice, the worst case scenario is every project takes every dollar. We wouldn't get very far. We'd probably get it to project 5 and we'd be done. If every one of those projects costs the full amount, and we didn't use grants, that sort of thing. But
Was going the bond route better than, say, IFA? What the Indiana Finance Authority?
yeah, well, we could look at that.
Because sometimes it is.
Yeah,
But I did not know if you guys had already ran those numbers when they were presented, or how things were.
yeah. I've had that discussion with somebody. There was not a roadblock. I think it had to do with how long the utility has been in place. There might be. I could be wrong on that, but it was something similar. It would be a revenue bond, obviously. So the way this would play out over several years, Michelle, is that, so we've got a lot of problems here in town. Now we've got a lot of new construction and stormwater, you know, you keep them maintained, they'll last your 50 years, 20 years. One that doesn't last long. Well, at 20 years from now, you know, we've got the bond paid off, and now we're probably starting to see other problems. Hopefully, we got the old part of town fixed up, and now maybe things that were put in place in the 50s and 60s, now they're trying, you know, maybe it's time to start getting some long-term reconstruction.
Well, I think you're always going to have that no matter what your project is.
Yeah.
I think what's key here, and I think it's common everywhere, is for 20 years, not only are you going to be constantly doing this improvement over time, but also you've got to maintain this.
Right.
In hopes that you're not building the wheel again at the end of the 20th year and starting over.
I think before we even have this new fee in place, if you could spend a little bit of time here in town, you would see that we're being obnoxiously aggressive on getting these lines cleared out. And
Is that just something that's not been done in the past? It just hasn't been addressed, or?
I suspect these lines have never been jetted out. And some of these lines are 80 to 100 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, the
Yeah, I'm not
technology to do it well just didn't exist. You could run a line, you know, in the 80s, you could probably run a line 200 feet. But now we can run it, you know, we bring in that machine and it runs 1,000 feet. I'm sure there's machines that are even more expensive per day that can go even farther.
When Banning mapped this out, did we already have kind of an asset plan in place that we know where all of these lines run, or did they go in and find these?
Okay.
Like a mapping system?
Okay, good question. So before I got here, they did start to do that.
Okay.
When I got here, though, I think we were spending, that money was not being spent efficiently. We were bringing in, you know, a two-man crew from Banning. They were cammering the lines, and they were just hitting dead ends everywhere. So I said, whoa, let's stop. Let's go back and let's start cleaning out these lines, because the cameras aren't going anywhere, because it could just be filled up with dirt, or it could be a collapsed line. Now, I will tell you this, I don't know how water makes it out of town, because almost every line we go down, we find a major collapse. I mean, every major line.
So then as we're doing this, and that kind of feeds into what Michelle mentioned, we will have our assets documented to where we can get on some kind of a rotating schedule for maintenance.
Yeah.
And like periodic maintenance should be built in as a capital expenditure. And so moving forward, that we're running a tight ship here. We always know every year, you know, X% goes into periodic maintenance. And of course, you're going to have issues arise. And, you know, you build contingencies in for those. But then obviously we're working in these big projects as well. So you really have, I would say, like 3 balls up in the air at all times. Your projects, your contingencies that pop up, and then your periodic maintenance.
Right.
So having all that mapped out. And so really anyone on any day, if something were to happen to any of our town staff, which is a vital role, someone else could, as an interim, look at this and say, we're on track. This is what we're doing this year. This is what we're doing here too, in all these areas, and not spend the time, you know, digging in and figuring out again, because then it's a waste of dollars each time there is staff movement. Because then the new person has to come and figure out, and it should be just literally a map of each of our systems.
Okay,
So
so,
they have an interactive map that they're constantly updating.
yes, so
Yeah.
let's go back to page 11. So I stopped paying the big dollars for an engineering firm to come in and map on GIS our, where our lines are. Because they were going 30 feet and then going, we don't know where to go. Because it was collapsed or so silted that we couldn't do it. So I said, whoa. Let's go back and we'll just start doing aggressive maintenance and jetting and let's see what we got. And so if you look, annual cost under small projects, materials, the manpower for small projects and for cleaning comes from the 1.5 full-time equivalent stormwater utility. Really, there's going to be one person initially assigned. And then we're going to take one person from street and half their salary will be paid. But on some days, we may have all the street guys working on the stormwater utility. Just like the next day, we may have 3 guys working on a broken line, a water line. Okay, so it's budgeted in there, an annualized cost to do the cleaning. And the 24,000, so a jetting machine eventually, but the 24,000 would be, that was based on bringing in the expensive jetting machine twice a month at $1,000 a day. And we really can't go quicker than that because we start to jet things out and then we find a major collapse. And so we stop and we're gonna start fixing it. You'll see, we've got that going to happen right across from the, after Thanksgiving, across from the museum. Major line that discharges into Fall Creek and it's collapsed.
So you're planning for 2021 forward, it's going to be an average cost of about $400,000 a year to maintain these lines.
Yes.
Maybe you mentioned before, I'm sorry, I don't recall, but where's the 400,000 going to come from?
From the fee that we collect per year.
That's not a part of the property tax bill.
Yes, so it's part of the property tax.
It is part of the property tax bill?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's covering the fee to maintain and the capital cost of the drain, or is it just the bond that's covering the capital cost of the drain?
The fee will cover the annualized cost, which is equipment, employees, cost to maintain, small projects. And then it will also have a revenue bond based on that.
Okay, okay.
So for instance, for example only, let's just say we collect $1 million a year. 400,000 of that will go to our annualized costs, then 600,000 a year to pay off the bond.
Got it, okay.
And if we get a 20-year bond, I don't know what the math would work out. Let's just say that's $2 million.
But the addendum on the property tax bill, that'll be forever.
What's that?
The addendum on the property tax bill, the ERU equivalent amount, that
Right.
will be perpetual.
Right. So if we're using the old fee at $4, so you would get on your property tax every 6 months a 4 times 6, $24 bill.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I like it, and then you might be thinking this way, Michelle, because I think you said you liked it through property taxes, because that, and the fact that it's paid every year, that's gonna catch people who live here now or live here later, so you don't have your inequities. And I think that's the best way to capture it.
There's a lot of properties that don't get a utility bill,
Yeah,
vacant properties.
that's one advantage.
Agricultural.
Rental properties, it goes to the homeowner. I mean, it wouldn't make, if you were renting a house, you would be confused if you had a stormwater fee on there. when the water and electricity is in the bank.
So as much as I'd like to believe that every man or woman pays his property taxes faithfully, there are those that don't.
Right.
Is there anything baked into this as a cushion for property taxes that are in default?
Yeah, Baker Tilly will factor that in.
Okay,
The
all right.
collection rate, they'll look at our collection rate here within the incorporated area, and that'll be factored in. And then I'm sure bond council will look at that too.
Okay.
I don't know if it's better, what's our, you know what our collection rate is on utilities off the top of your head? So in the big picture, if we were all around for 50 more years, I would, as the town grows, and those are, of course, new developments, that'll be new revenue. I think Carrot Glen alone, if it was $10, I think it would be 50,000 a year.
Well, I don't think it's an unreasonable amount to tack on the property taxes.
Yeah. Okay, and then the last pages are, if you really want to get into it, is each project has an engineering, a spreadsheet that has the engineering costs. Now, one of the things too, when we do put in new lines, we're going to, one of the problems that we have in town now that the Fall Creek has come through and disconnected gutter lines and yard drains, gutters, yard drains, basement sump pumps is now it's being discharged into our street. So one of the things that we'll do when we do put in a line is that we'll stub off laterals to the property line. We'll have, of course, regulations, but allow the homeowners to then drain their gutter and yard drain into that instead of in their basement sump pump into that, instead of just throwing it out on the street and letting it freeze and tearing up our, ruining our nice asphalt repaving job that we do. It'll also allow us to combine projects. Let's say we need to reconstruct the street, we'll go in, we'll also, part of that is we'll put in a new line and put in a curb and gutter. A classic example of that will be Franklin Street. The first one we'll do is Water Street. We'll stub off to the property line. And hopefully that'll solve our streets. So everybody pumping in when it's 20 below and everybody pumps into the street. Now we've got a 3-block long skating.
It's a lot here,
I know.
so, I mean, it's good.
You set some kind of timeline out.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll have, working backwards, to collect, have it on the property tax mid-year. We need to pass it in February. We haven't started talking to the county yet about putting on the property tax. We want to wait until the election. how that.
Did you say, I'm sorry, Scott, you had or had not started talking to him about it?
We had not started talking to him. The plan was now that we were gonna wait till after the election to see who the officials were we were gonna have to, that we were gonna deal with. So there's two things we need to talk to the county about, the legal drains and putting this on the property tax. The collection on the property tax.
When you say the legal drains, you mean projects A, B, and C?
Yes. Projects
Okay.
ABC.
Yeah.
And maintenance of other drains. Those ABC are where we actually need to go in and bid out some work and do some repairs, but also just some annual maintenance. I think back on page 11, if we could go back to that. Yeah, estimated cost per year on page 12. And about, so 15 on the open and on the tiled 40, so about 55,000 a year on just the maintenance,
Okay.
which is in addition to capital projects A, B, and C.
And I didn't ask when we were on, they call them ERUs, I'm used to saying EDUs. The ERUs, did they do any factoring in with projections for growth?
No, but that's a very good point. I'm sure.
I didn't catch that. What did you say, Jen?
On the ERUs, basically in accounting, Michelle, that you and I deal with, we make adjustments for growth. So on this, it would be, we are going to have some growth.
Right, yeah.
So
You were ahead of me because I was just thinking, I wonder if they've accounted for additional growth coming in.
yeah, and that's an adjustment, and really we will start seeing here in the next year to 5 years.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's going to change.
Right. Well, we did a rough calculation. So the town is only 4,500 right now, and with the new, what's under construction now, we'll jump to 6,000 in population.
Okay.
But I think a rough estimate, if the whole town was built out, of course, this would take decades, we'd be at 40,000. So, what will happen with the stormwater fee as there's build out and it's all new construction, so it should have if we maintain a good, healthy life, there shouldn't be a lot of capital projects, because we'll make the developers put those in, and our job is to maintain them, and hopefully they last 50 years.
So your maintenance costs are going to go up perpetual to, or perpendicular to the increase in your tax base.
Right, but I would think capital projects, we'd eventually hit a point where all we're doing is maintenance.
Right. Yeah, you're not going to have what you're having to do right now.
Right. It's just like paving. If you get every road if you rate them 1 through 10 and you get everything to a 7, then you never have to reconstruct. You're maintaining.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden your maintenance costs just plummet to 30%. And so I think.
Well, while your revenues coming in just continue to grow.
Right. And so what'll happen is, I think eventually we'll actually be able, probably 20 years from now, bring back down the, adjusting for inflation. Either never raise the rate or not raise the rate and keep it steady, even though the buying power goes down over time. I wouldn't see the town needing to do a lot of increases with the raw dollar amount.
I would agree, especially if you're factoring in that the increases to your ERUs, because really it's not necessarily 1 for 1, because they're coming in with a certain rate, but that helps offset the whole. And their maintenance is cheaper.
Yes.
On the other news, so.
Right.
So then over time,
Yeah.
it kind of it
Yeah.
flattens.
Yeah. You know, and the other thing you'll see is we're being more aggressive. You see that street sweep a lot more now.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
Oh, it hasn't been by my.
It's been mine. I didn't know what it was at first.
Well, if you don't have curb and gutter, you know,
I do. You don't right behind me.
yeah.
Yeah. No, this is good. I think it helps move the town forward. I mean, again, you're protecting, or you're basically protecting your investment, just like a homeowner. You put your maintenance back into your home. If you don't, we know what happens. It falls apart and it costs more. So keeping things, that periodic maintenance is so crucial in all of our utilities. Stormwater, water, wastewater, all of it. And then having a plan and a system in place. To be systematic about our maintenance.
Yeah. We will, I don't, back to the one question about, you know, the inventory of what we've got. You don't have to sell me, my first job in civil engineering was running a GIS department for 5 years. I used to map things for a living. But right now we can't map it because we just can't see it. And as we pick each project and do the engineering work and the pre-engineering work, we'll begin to connect the dots, right?
And then anything new going in.
Yeah, anything new going in.
We're documenting
Right.
it into whatever system we have. But
Yeah.
I don't know what system.
Yeah, and I can't, it's just, I don't know how water makes it out of town. It's getting out somewhere and it's not going where it was designed to go. We've poured so much dye into drains and then have never see it again. I don't know. You know, and just the other day we poured some in and we thought for sure it was gonna come into Fall Creek at the South Fall right there on State Street, and it was 50 feet down the line and we can't tell where it came from. It just like percolated up from somewhere. So
Speaking of new infrastructure, are we required to have digital as-built submittals for these subdivisions? Yeah, giving us that.
yeah, that'll be part of the UDO.
Okay.
We have.
I'm assuming Fall Creek requires that for sewer.
I would assume. Well, they put it in. We put in electric and water, the Fall Creek.
Well, I mean, the contractor will build the
Yes,
sewers.
I misspoke. They contract with us to put in the electric.
Yeah.
They put in the water, the developers did,
And provide us with
and they put in the storm.
as-built.
Something I didn't think to ask before, but will everyone who lives within Pendleton proper be assessed this on their property tax bill?
Yes. If you
Okay.
own a property and you live in California, you get a property tax bill, you're the property owner in California.
Within the Pendleton proper, right?
Yeah, right. State law doesn't allow us to go outside, and it also does not allow us to spend money outside of the boundaries, town boundaries.
Okay.
And all of the parcels are coded to be in town. That's how they'll sign.
Yeah. Are you guys okay with the taxable units being 20%?
Oh, the non-taxables.
The non-tax,
Yeah,
tax
okay.
exempt. I'm sorry.
Tax
I'm sorry.
I think it's reasonable.
I think it's reasonable, definitely charged.
I mean, there's gonna be a lot of people that aren't gonna like it. Either they're not gonna like change, or, you know, they don't see how paying this assessment's not, they don't understand why they're going to have to pay it when the water didn't impact them in the first place. But what they don't understand is it's an overall quality of life improvement for the entire town.
Yeah, you know, I will say this, the political will is there now, because when Fall Creek went through and disconnected everything, let's back up a little bit. The history of Fall Creek is when that regional district was formed, the wastewater district, the decision was made in the early on, and they to not put in new lines in Pendleton. So that was in the 80s, if I remember right. And then the build out happened in the unincorporated areas and in places like in Ingalls and Marklettville, where they didn't have sanitary sewer. So now they came back. So now the Pendleton lines are now another 30, 40 years older. And it was time to replace them. Well, as you know, federal law does not allow stormwater runoff to be discharged into a sanitary sewer.
Right.
So they had to disconnect yard drains, gutter drains, and sump pump connections that have been there for 80 years. Now all of a sudden, people who have had no problem with flooding in their yard, now they've got horrendous situations. And so I think most people see the problem and experience it firsthand.
Well, I know when it rains really hard, the last place I want to be is downtown Pendleton.
Well, knock on wood, we're getting some stuff open. I don't know where it ends up, but some of it's getting, some of these lines are getting open.
I think this is good stuff, Scott.
So the next step is Baker Tilly will do their study, and then that's when you'll see some rate numbers. But that's going to be then I will recommend to the town council that we retract from that to something that I think people will be comfortable with. It can't be $4. In fact, you can't even. Oh, that was the issue. You can't even get a loan unless your stormwater rate is $5. Because if you're less than $5, they don't think you're serious, and it's not sustainable.
Well, it's almost like the grants, you know, some of the grants that are being offered, it needs to be a large, serious project to even secure those as well.
Yeah.
So from us, then you'll come back when Baker Tilly has some numbers. And
Right.
you said you're going to scale back, and then really that's just looking at a shorter period of time, maybe of projects. If you're thinking of
No, I think the reality is that so the maximum rate will be based on what the total capital projects would cost, 1 through 8. But I'm pretty confident a lot of these will find that we don't need to be full construction, but we'll never know until we get into the engineering.
So we'll just start with 1, 2, 3, and we'll go as far as we can. basically.
You'll go as far as we can, and then the bond runs out, and then we're done.
Minus small projects and maintenance.
Yeah,
That'll
small
continue.
project, yeah. You know.
What's Baker Tilly's timeline?
Gosh, they just sent it to me, and it's at my desk. It's actually bond counsel laid out the timeline. I think they'll have Baker Tilly will be done at the end of the year. So a month. I just signed the contract with them this beginning of this week. Got the engineering study already. They're moving, they've started.
Do you have any other questions, Michelle, or?
No, I think I'm good right now.
So this body, it doesn't have really jurisdiction on this, your water and electrical, but it makes sense to run it
Yeah.
through. Maybe eventually you will have jurisdiction.
I appreciate it. It's very helpful. And again, you know, this is very similar to stuff we were looking at with the other rate study, quite honestly. It's the planning, understanding even what capital projects we needed, where you saw
Yeah.
for the others, there really wasn't anything built in. There
Yeah.
just wasn't any substance.
Yeah.
So this kind of ties in with back in the summer, what we were talking about for the
Right.
other utilities.
We get past this, and then I'll put together a 20-year plan for electrical and water, or vice versa. I don't know which one. So the investment, and have you seen the good work that's been happening with trimming under the power lines?
I have all over. I noticed, were they on, Oakville Road I was on?
Yes, by the park, between the Iron Bridge.
Yes,
That was their work.
yeah, because I had to stop and go another way for a while.
Yeah,
But I figured that's what they were doing.
right. I wish there was, you know, it's being paid through the electric utility for line maintenance. So I wish there was it's almost like we're getting a haircut. You never realize, you know, you let your hair grow long sometimes until you get your haircut, you didn't realize, oh, it's getting pretty shabby. So we're getting some good comments out there. I've not had, you know, I'm a little nervous because right now they're doing what they call mowing. And then they will go to areas where they'll only do either tree removal or tree trimming. Because there has to be, Craig, help me out. Are you online? You're still online. What's the clearance we have to have on each side of a power line?
10 feet either side and 15 feet above and clear to the ground is what we can do.
So right now they're doing mowing, and that's mostly strips where it's trees that are junk trees, you know, honeysuckle, that sort of thing. It'll grow up tall enough into the line, but they're weed trees. And you just go in with a drum that has teeth on it, and they just chew that out, and then you've got nice mulch at the end of it. Then in places where that's not feasible, we've got some traditional old trees, then we'll do the old style of tree trimming and going in.
And some of that's from the trees that are still out there that are compromised.
Oh, yeah, I mean, the tornado, yeah. And our reliability is just, we've got a lot of trees that are shedding limbs because of the tornado and everything. So it's time we did it, but aesthetically, it's working out very well.
Well, that's good. Because sometimes people don't understand the positive part of it,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah, we've had a couple of people where they didn't want us to do it. And we said, okay, and then we did their neighbors, and they're like, well, you know, maybe you ought to come back.
Sounds like good progress. I don't know who all we have on the line. If we have any,
We don't have
if
any,
anyone has questions, I don't know if they raise or however that works on there.
all the participants, unless they could unmute themselves.
Okay, okay. Well, I appreciate this. So aside from that, that's all we had on our agenda, and then we will continue to move forward to hear about updates on this, and then as we're ready to go back and revisit the other utilities. Only do so much at a time.
Yeah,
Get that back on the system.
but you're right, we need to plan. Our first step will be an inventory on water.
Inventories are just so good to know your assets and value of them, and having an understanding of the age.
Yeah.
And they're not always the oldest in your place. I think you've discovered that with in stormwater,
Yeah,
although you don't know why, but
right.
sometimes it happens. So if no one else has any questions, I mean, this is something we don't vote on, right?
No,
No, we're being presented. I think we can adjourn. I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah, I noticed
Bye.
in there we have 1,600 residential ERUs, so that's gonna double the subdivisions we have on the books now. It's gonna be 800 more at least.
So $10.
I mean, the industrial and
Well, there's gonna be
commercial pay-
750 new homes, right? So 2 persons per home, that's 1,500, so we go 4,500.
Well, I'm just thinking on the bill.
Yeah, but on the parcels,
750 new tax parcels,
right, so it's 750 new parcels, and let's just say the.
plus the homeowners association. Oh, and everything.
Yeah. So let's,
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
so 750 new parcels times 120 a year, if it's $10, that's 90,000 a year, just on the new homes. That sounds right, because I said Kirkland and.
And that helps with inflation or contingencies that are costly. Even though we're looking at scaling back on a few projects, we're hopeful. And I think those things do happen. There's always the other end as well, like this is going to cost a lot. So some of that money coming in.
Yeah.
Then,
Well, I'm sure those won't be the last over the next 5 years.
yeah, I
So,
don't know.
You know, we don't have in there MS4 too, that's gonna be an expense. That's. What's one? I forget what MS4 is.
municipal separate sewer, storm sewer
Oh.
system.
Yeah. So there are certain things that we have to do with public outreach and. Oh, there's a bunch of stuff we need to do. We need to paint the warning over each grate, do not pour into this drains directly, whatever the saying is, this drains directly into the water, do not pour hazardous material or oil. You're supposed to have that painted on every
Right,
grate.
yeah, they make quilts and labels you can glue on.
Yeah,
We had some at some point.
we did.
I'm sure most of our
And they
castings
all-
are too old to have them.
The one, they had a little fish on them.
Yeah,
They were raised, but then the first winter and they just
Scraped it off.
plow
Right.
right off. So, yeah, it's probably not a good design.
yeah.
Cause I